We're here with Senator Janice Bowling, and she's got two real exciting bills this year. Well, probably more than that, but two that we're going to talk about today.
Yes, I have the FREE Act, which is for homeschoolers, and that will actually be educational freedom. And it will be the ultimate freedom in Tennessee because it says that the state has no involvement whatsoever, nor does the A4, that's parenthetical A and 4, part of the code, will be a new subdivision on homeschoolers. And this one strictly says that if the parent determines they want to homeschool their child, they shall be able to homeschool their child without any reporting to the state, without any attendance records to the state, without the things that are quote unquote busy work kind of, and yet they're strings from the state. And so this way, the parent is actually free and free to choose. And that's been a big topic around here lately, parental choice. There should be choice, and there should be, and it should be for this homeschooling alternative so that you do not have to record anything with the state.
Well, and one of the ways that you can register right now as a homeschool family is under an umbrella school, which helps you meet all those requirements. And some people are paying for an umbrella school that, you know, does all this stuff for them, and really they don't have to send in some of these required things already. They're just having to pay an extra fee to an external entity to do virtually the same thing as this bill would allow them to do.
That is correct. That is correct. And years ago, I homeschooled our youngest child. And at that time, I had to register with the local LEA, go with the superintendent, present what I was going to be teaching to the child or what program it was going to be. And then after about 3 or 4 years, he had to take the TCAP test. And he was going into 8th grade at that point. And he scored 12th grade, 11th month on all of them. So I said, does that mean he can be through now? And of course, that's not what that meant. But homeschooling is the most natural thing in the world. And when I was doing it, it was just beginning to catch on. And I loved it. So I've been a proponent of homeschooling from my personal experience and from my interaction with all the other families that were homeschooling back in the 80s. And that's when there was also a court case that was going on with a family out in Memphis. He was over all the educational teaching for one of the largest Baptist churches in the state of Tennessee. And so he had thousands of people that he was responsible for. I don't remember how much staff, a significant number of staff. And they deemed that he and his wife, because they did not have a college degree, were not able to homeschool their child. And at that time, the state was supposed to allow for an exception to the bachelor's degree. And a bachelor's degree really does not make you more qualified to teach your child. But this was a test case. And sure enough, they said they weren't qualified. Well, if they weren't qualified, there could not be anybody qualified. And that's when we began to see some better laws regarding homeschooling in Tennessee. And now they have evolved, and there's still more. But this, I think, will be the ultimate in the freedom to allow a parent to homeschool without any encumbrance from having to pay at another level or from having to report to the locals, the LEA.
And then you've also got the Restoring State Sovereignty through Nullification Act for the 4th year in a row. So can you walk me through what kind of went down with this bill over the last few years, why it hasn't passed, what it does?
The bill is quite simple. A nullification is a freedom or a responsibility, I'll say that, of each state if the federal government, which has a very small garden, as Bud Hulsey would say, to hoe in. It's just a very small garden. The states have a much bigger garden. There were states before there was the federal government. And the federal government was supposed to do the boundaries of our country. They were supposed to make sure that we were not invaded, that we didn't have mass immigration, illegal immigration. That's a responsibility of the federal government. And there was going to be the central currency or whatever, so that there would be intrastate commerce, but not interstate commerce, but intrastate commerce was still none of the federal government's business. What took place within the state is intrastate. The interstate, okay, then you'll have a federal mediation there at that point. But the nullification just said the federal government has tried to do something that's beyond their scope of authority, and we're not going to enforce it. And you can just ignore it, or you can have 5 different ways in this bill that the people could come before either the governor or the AG or the people in the General Assembly, or you could have a community, or you could have a group of communities. And there were certain numbers, so it would not be a haphazard thing. It would be something to make a statement, though, that in Tennessee we recognize that is beyond the scope of the federal government, and we are wanting to say we're not going to pay to enforce that. Typically, with anything the federal government does, it expects the state government to provide the regulatory oversight. So we're having to pay to enforce something that they're saying. But if they get out of their garden, if they're asking us to pay for something that's clearly not their responsibility, such as education was not their responsibility until Jimmy Carter made it a federal Department of Education. And since then, public education has been on a downhill slope. And so now, with our President Trump, he is going to restore that mode, that there will no longer be that federal Department of Education where they will send you this money and you've got to spend 10 times that amount in regulatory oversight and be accountable to things that you don't like in Tennessee, things that you don't like in Georgia, things you don't like in Arkansas. This is going to restore the sovereignty in education so that we're teaching our children the things that we want them to learn in Tennessee. We're not worried about the big federal level of oversight and control. So when you get nullification and you look at the educational freedom, they kind of intersect there at that point where we're showing that, yes, we have the freedom to educate our children with this new bill. And no, federal government, you can't come in and put rules and regulations on how we homeschool our child in the state of Tennessee.
And this bill got sent to summer study, right?
Last summer, and we had a summer study. There actually was one, and but there was no determination made at the summer study. It was more for information only, and people across the state of Tennessee showed up. They drove all the way to Nashville to be party to that summer study and to discuss the fact that in Tennessee, we recognize that the federal government does not exist to control us. The federal government is made up from when the states came together and determined for certain things, for war, for the territorial boundaries, for those very limited things, for interstate commerce, we needed a federal government. But we didn't need them messing in the business of Tennessee or North Carolina or Maryland or any other of the early states. They had the authority. The federal government had very limited authority. People understood that up until about the 1800s, mid to late, and at Harvard Law School, there was, I think his name was Christopher Columbus, something or other. He was the chairman of the board or the president of Harvard. And he stopped going back to the original document to determine federal law and constitutional law, where they would go back to the Constitution on any case that was talking about, have you transgressed your authority or have you gone into an area that you shouldn't go? After that, they started using what's called commonly now case law. So it's kind of like the childhood game of gossip. Have you ever played gossip? You sit in a circle, you whisper in someone's ear, whatever. Then they whisper what you whispered in someone else's ear. And by the time it goes around the room, it's hilarious to hear what this person says you said. Typically, there's absolutely no recognition of it. Same way with case law. A case was tried on a particular set of circumstances, and this was the determination. Well, then the next case, rather than going back to ground zero, which is the Constitution, and judging it against the Constitution, they judge it against that previous case, which was random. it was a totally different set of circumstances, unique circumstances that made its way to the Supreme Court. So now we're going to go back to the case of that case, and then the case of that case. And pretty soon you have gossip. And the rulings that come out of the court system have nothing in common with our Constitution. And so nullification is a way to restore that kind of a remediation of case law. You can look and say, wait a minute, they're basing that on this, that was based on this, but let's look at the Constitution. No, they had no authority. So let's just say we're not going to keep that because of nullification, because we can determine that we're not. And whether it's 2,000 individuals, or communities, or the governor, or the General Assembly, or the AG, those are 5 pathways to challenge a law that is not legally done, constitutionally done. And when you look at that and look at the challenge from 5 different ways, it helps the people not feel as frustrated as we have felt in recent years. What can we do? What can we do? We know that's not legal. We know the President of the United States cannot tell us we have to have a shot. He has no authority over our medical decisions. And what happened? What did a lot of people do? They had a shot because the president told them they had to. Well, I can just stand on a rooftop and say, everyone has to wear purple on Thursday. And they might throw a net over me and put me away, because I have no authority. Neither did the president have any authority to step outside of those finely defined authorities of the president. And these are the kinds of bills, though, that I like to carry. I don't want to add to the Green Book. I don't want to just be writing laws, but I want to make sure we're going back to things that are constitutional, that reflect what our founding fathers meant, that reflect what our state governments meant, and not where you have evolved to the point of going from a human being with intelligence standing upright on 2 feet to a monkey swinging from a tree. It's kind of reverse evolution. If you believe in evolution, I don't. But I do believe that the evolving, it's more of a devolving of law when you stop going back and challenging it against the original documents, the Constitution.